Good morning from Maverick Physical Therapy, guys, and our inaugural kickoff of Kinetic Linking Fridays. Kinetic Linking Fridays, kinetic chain, our bodies. Kinetic chain standing for kinetic force-producing system that is linked, chain linked together, meaning the body works as an integrated, interdependent unit. Today, as part of our kind of two-part series, we're going to take a look at the foot and the ankle and function-wise what happens to it during a simple task such as walking, such as running. We'll dig in later into some squats and some lunges and other kind of more dynamic activities. Not that walking and running can't be and aren't dynamic at all. But we're going to use some analogies, and then we're going to follow up our dialogue and our conversation with some activities, some things that you can get started with today to help you out along your kind of movement adventure. So when I think of the foot and the ankle, analogy-wise, I'm very visual. I need to be able to see and touch stuff so that I can make it a little more practical. But when I think of the foot and the ankle, one thing that really comes to mind to me is the old washcloth. It's my son Maverick's washcloth. It's Batman. My wife got this little square thing yesterday and was very curious as to what actually it was. It turns out it was a washcloth by about a 1 inch by 1 inch by about a 1/4 inch high, kind of folded up plastic encased bulb mat. When we gave him a bath last night, the instruction said submerge it in some warm water for about a minute before you start to unravel the washcloth. It's interesting how growing up and now using a washcloth, whether it's to wash your face, wash your little guy's hands and feet, maybe to soak something up off the ground, or to clean something off the ground, maybe to wash some windows in the house, some car windows, exterior of a car after you wash it. It's interesting how that when you dip it in water, it really kind of loads up a lot of water. You take it out, you wring it out good. Well, it's pretty interesting how the same thing happens with the foot. The foot needs to be able to load first. The foot needs to be able to load, and it works in a system in that as the washcloth, as you wring it out and kind of bring water in, things are going in opposite directions. Really, again, similar to that of the foot. So in order to be able to make what we gathered usable, to be able to kind of rinse things out and to get rid of things, we need to be able to load this guy on up with a lot of good useful stuff such as water or a cleaning solution. And then to make it usable, we need to be able to wring it. So with the foot right here, let's talk a little anatomy-wise. So when the front foot comes in contact with the ground with walking and with running, let's go simply just kind of walking for today. We'll get into some of the running at a later time. But as we walk, this heel bone right here, the calcaneus, he needs to kind of come down and in a little bit. He needs to rotate in this frontal plane. The heel needs to collapse a little bit. Heel needs to collapse. We'll get to the washcloth analogy in a second. The heel needs to collapse down and in that frontal plane, which then the substentaculum tali, it reminds me of the elf on the shelf, the talus right here. That bone that's stuck on top of the calcaneus, but that's right below the tibia, this leg bone, and encased by the fibula on the outside. The talus then, because the heel rotates down and in the frontal plane, the talus drops down and in. It plantar flexes and it adducts. This spins off this chain reaction. It then allows the tibia and the fibula to medially rotate, to internally rotate. So that further up the chain, the femur can medially rotate. So that the pelvis can medially rotate to really turn on the butt and the hips, that posterior and that lateral pelvic girdle that we've so much been talking about it gives us that relative internal rotation, what the distal segment is doing in relation to the proximal, based on gravity, momentum, inertia, and ground reaction force as being a bottom-up driver from the heel. Things need to spin from the bottom up faster than what they are at the top. It's also interesting that how, let's go back to this little bone that's kind of stuck and wedged right in the middle of this heel and this leg right here. It's really interesting how when that talus drops down and in, so the heel kind of collapses, it everts, talus shoots down and in. Well, that's then like having the key to your house or an apartment or your car. It allows the rear foot, which is comprised of that heel, the talus right there, to separate, to disassociate from the midfoot and the forefoot. When we're looking at the midfoot, we have that talonavicular joint, that calcaneocuboidal joint. We have the navicular, the cuboid, we have the 3 cuneiforms, and then we have the 5 metatarsals that make up the midfoot, and then we have all the little phalanges, the little guys right at the end that make up the forefoot. So in order, a washcloth analogy back into play right here, as the rear foot kind of drops and rotates in, that midfoot and that forefoot need to be able to loosen up in order to shape to the contour of the surface, the environmental changes that you are walking, running, squatting, and lunging, hopping, and jumping in. So, whether it is a hill or some mountainous terrain that you're hiking and running in, a curb, a sidewalk with some cracks, some asphalt that has kind of some little ripples in it, the midfoot and the forefoot need to be able to, relatively speaking, twist the other way. When the foot comes in contact with the ground and that talus drops down and in, this tibia, this leg bone, needs to be able to translate forward. It needs to be able to translate forward over the foot and separating from the fibula, splaying like a little fork. That talus from back to front goes narrow to wide, making it pivotal for this chain reaction to occur. The mid-tarsal joint, which is where we get a lot of this disassociation three-dimensionally right here, we look for that to be able to separate. We need dorsiflexion right here so that the top of the foot can come closer to this leg bone, or the leg bone in function, feet in contact with the ground, is driving forward closer to this foot so that we get this dorsiflexion-like effect at the mid-tarsal joint. We also need eversion of that mid-tarsal joint. We need eversion, and we also need abduction. So we need to get a little separation right here of that mid-tarsal joint as the midfoot and the forefoot invert. The midfoot and the forefoot will invert. So they'll kind of twist on up. That first and that second ray will dorsiflex, and they will invert. The fourth and the fifth will kind of, they will kind of plantar flex, kind of invert a little bit. Is that making sense, guys? So what we're looking at here is then the opportunity to gather and to load, to sponge up a lot of energy that's produced and provided by gravity pushing down, ground reaction force pushing back up, momentum and inertia, all three-dimensionally, so that we can load. This is all so that in part 2 of our series, this next week, we'll get into TZ2 of the foot and the ankle, in which we need something firm and solid to be able to push off from. Basic physiological principle in chain reaction, kinetic linking, is that we need a firm and solid base of support to be able to push from. If we cannot load, we cannot explode. If we're not mobile within the connective tissue, the anterior, the posterior, and the lateral compartment of the leg, and if we're not mobile capsule-wise at that talocurval joint, the ankle joint, at that subtalar joint where the calcaneus and the talus come together, at the mid-tarsal joint where the midfoot is separated from the rear foot, you should not expect to move well. Consistently, efficiently wise, you will not move well. So we get this ringing out like effect. We get the heel dropping kind of down and in, frontal plane. We have the midfoot and the forefoot that will kind of invert. We have this twist. so that when we go to move, we have another twist. We get this locking, this closed kind of packed position that provides a lot of great stabilization and explosion out of it, and that midfoot and forefoot will rotate and kind of twist in the opposite direction. A lot of things going on three-dimensionally. So what we're talking today about super important in terms of minimizing postural distortion patterns, compensations, as well as treating the foot and the ankle as a unit with the hip. We're going to, in further